Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Here with my partner, Dr. Ian Billinghurst, for an exciting show on metabolism. Dr. B,
Wow,
welcome back.
most important. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Rob. Good evening, good afternoon. And wow, that is probably the most important word in the biological dictionary, metabolism.
Yeah, people aren't really. I don't think a lot of people, the general public, is that aware of of what how your metabolism changes over just age, but with genetics, epigenetics. Your mitochondria. We if you're in the world in the very small segment of the population that's very into health span and lifespan, these are folks that are doing cold plunges and saunas and intermittent fasting and keto and off keto, switching, getting metabolically flexible. If you're not in that, you don't have to be, but you do have to learn about metabolism, because it's really what probably creates the majority of the really nasty, bad diseases. And so, Dr. B, why don't you just do a quick, before we introduce our guest, who's going to talk to us about that and mitochondrial health. Maybe just do a
Most,
quick little, yeah.
yep, we talk about mitochondria, metabolism, health. Is that my goal at the moment, Rob?
That's it.
Okay. Energy. If we don't have energy, we are not here. We're dead. Period. If our energy starts to fail, then cells start to fail. And we get degenerative disease. Why? Well, it all stems back to little organelles called mitochondria. And mitochondria are living organisms, you might say. Well, actually, they are. They're living organisms within our cells, because they are parasites that we adopted as our friend around about, well, I'm a bit rusty on this, but I think it was about 3 billion years ago. They popped into our cells, possibly to do us harm, but then the cell back then said to that parasite, I want you to do something for me. I want you to produce energy for me, and in return, I will feed you. And so cells way back, when we were single-celled organisms, adopted these parasites, which eventually became energy-producing organelles within the cell called mitochondria. We'll call them mitochondria now. The mitochondria gave most of their DNA to the cell, so it ends up in the nucleus. And there's just a few genes of the mitochondria left, but those genes are vitally important, and the mitochondria are important because we have this contract with the mitochondria. If we look after our mitochondria, they will look after us. This was a contract put in place, as I said, around about 3 billion years ago. And it's allowed multicellular animals. It's allowed us to function. But there's always a two-edged sword to every contract. If we don't look after our mitochondria, then we start to fail because we get lack of energy, and organs start to fail. We actually end up with degenerative disease. No matter where it comes from, how we destroy our mitochondria, if we don't look after them, we will start to degenerate, and we will start to degenerate faster than our bodies were programmed to, not sure of the English, programmed to do. So our mitochondria are fundamental to life. They're fundamental to aging or non-aging. They're fundamental to degenerative disease. And interestingly, they're fundamental to the most feared disease of our time, cancer. Because when mitochondria slowly fail over time, cells can turn on, and these are stem cells, can turn on an alternative method of energy production. And that's a signal for that cell to go into endless rounds of multiplication, a disease we call cancer. So we have a guest today who's going to talk about this. And his father's research, his brilliant knowledge of mitochondria, aging, and disease, and a product that he has developed, or his father developed, I believe, but I need to find out more about this. I know something about it, but not a lot. So I need to learn along with you today about this product, about this man, about the brilliance of metabolism when properly applied to the treatment of disease, or the understanding of metabolism, the use of metabolism, the use of supplements, diet, everything we can to maintain the health of our metabolism, which is the production of energy by mitochondria. So without further ado, I hand this back to Rob, who will introduce our guest.
Yes. Well, you did a great job. And so let's bring on he is the creator, the CEO of Poly MVA, took it over from his father, Mr. Al Sanchez. Hello, Al. How are you today?
Hey there, this is Rob Ryan. I just want to say how much we enjoy making this content for you here. And if you are enjoying it, would you like our video down below? And would you subscribe to our YouTube channel? It sure does help us get discovered by more people like you who need information like this. And also, down below in our description, the top link is to our trial pack. We hope you'll order one for your dog so your dog can have fermented superfoods that give them nutrition like they can't find anywhere else. Hard to get nutrients that are easily absorbed. Thank you very much. Now back to the show.
Hello, gentlemen. Hi, Rob. Hi, Ian. Thank you for having me, and excited to be here.
Nice to have you on.
Yep. So we did this introduction into the mitochondrial health and dysfunction. We'll talk a little bit more about it. Okay. And your supplement is uniquely specialized in helping with mitochondrial health. Can you tell us a little bit about, we're going to talk about, you have a human product, as you could see on the screen brilliantly, and a pet product. Can you tell us about Poly MVA for pets and what it does for mitochondrial health?
Sure, happy to. Well, and again, it kind of actually started in the animals. That's where Dr. Ant did his testing and looking to see if he had something. It's a unique story. There's a book out there by Dr. Merrill Garnett. He's actually the inventor and discoverer. My father discovered Merrill, and he was the creator, inventor, and developer of Poly MVA for pets, the family, what we call lipoic acid mineral complexes. It's a pretty amazing story because it goes back to the 1950s. That's where this really originates, and his development. And he didn't develop something to say, hey, let me develop a product and let me go see where it can be used. No, like all the specialty tools in the world, they're created to target a very specific pathway. So Ian did a great job there of introductions to mitochondria. Yeah, that 3 billion year figure, that's right. Regular cells and how cells evolved. It's fascinating to dive into those weeds, but it explains a lot as to why our regular cells have DNA. And guess what? Mitochondria have their own DNA. And by the way, we get that from our mother's side. And there's a reason for that because of survival. It's fascinating. Trust me, we could geek out on this all day long if you want to. But I love it because what that does is it helps to me explain not only what I'm explaining to you, but now I understand why metabolic approaches are so powerful. We've talked about, Rob, you and I, just food. Why does food change the dynamics of the environment so quickly? Not just because it's healthier, which is hugely important, but it changes your metabolic activity, right? Look at any crazy fad diet over the years. What's it doing? Ultimately, it's knocking on the door of metabolism, right? It's regulating sugars, it's regulating proteins and amino acids and carbohydrates and fats in whatever proportion that it might be. But ultimately, it keeps knocking on the door of metabolics. And as Ian had mentioned, what happens as we age? Our metabolics generally go down and our not so good health generally rises. It's a one-to-one correlation. So Merrill saw this, he was trained in that, and he used, I think the easiest example is, in today's day and age, sadly, it's a cancer cell. Not so because it's a cancer cell, but it's an anaerobic cell, which is hugely important that Ian kind of touched on. Bacteria that
meaning what? Anaerobic for people who don't know.
Meaning that it does not require oxygen to generate its energy supply. Okay, so unlike us, we have to breathe in oxygen, and then we have to exhale carbon dioxide. Bacteria, as most of us, if we remember back to our high school biology days, they don't need oxygen. They can burn glucose without any oxygen because they have a different metabolism. But guess what? So do we. Our bodies do that all the time naturally. You think of our immune system. You think of probably the easiest example would be, all of us have went to the gym long after we stopped going, and the next day we're super sore because we overdid it. We thought we could, push that weight a little harder. Well, we burned up all our glucose and energy stores, and we didn't have enough available. So our cells switched metabolism and says to keep this cell going, I got to keep producing. The quickest and fastest way is anaerobic metabolism. I don't need to go through this complex biological process. I'm just going to burn sugar, get 2 units of ATP, have a nice day. But its byproduct is lactic acid. There you go. Lactic acidosis, right? And if you get too much of that, now your muscles are sore. Well, what happens if your organs are dysfunctional for whatever reason, and they keep burning this process because their energetics, their metabolism isn't correct? Then, as Ian just had mentioned earlier, then we run into a problem. So Dr. Annett realized this, and he says, okay, here's an aerobic cell, here's an anaerobic cell. One uses oxygen, one doesn't. What's going on here? So he dove into the cell cycle, figured it out. It's no coincidence that 2 of the main ingredients that are in Poly MVA and polypipettes is alpha-lipoic acid and thiamine. Why? Because they are cofactors for the conversion of glucose into pyruvate into something called acetyl-CoA. That's about probably as much science-y I'm going to get into it. Unless you want me to get into more, I'm happy to. But that's the step. And that's why Poly is what Poly is. It's why Poly does what Poly does. It's a 20-year story that I just condensed down to about 2 minutes right there. But that's the reason why. So he went forth with that. My father lost his wife, lost my mom to cancer when I was 3. That put him on the path to realizing there were other options out there. You fast forward 30 years, I lose my sister, Tina, the oldest of us. I'm the youngest, to cancer again. It brings me into it. That's why I sit here before you on this journey to help educate, because that information is not readily available out there. And the information that sadly is in the 21st century is sometimes just too much and overwhelming for so many people. So I really appreciate you, Rob and Ian, for what you do to keep just sharing the basic message of what is out there. Rob, as you mentioned, 20 years ago, you've known Poly. And so we keep doing what Poly does, and that's helping mitochondria one at a time.
Yep.
Can I just ask a question at this point, Al? I've been, a fan of Otto Warburg.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, and I've forgotten the name of the person you mentioned who actually made these discoveries.
Dr.
Was
Garnett.
this Dr. Garnett?
Merrill Garnett, yes.
Yeah. Was this independent of Otto Warburg, or was it as using Otto Warburg's studies in mitochondria as a springboard?
Nice connection. Yes. No, he used those as a springboard. That gave him the understanding. It's fascinating when you look at it historically. And what I mean from that is metabolics was actually where everybody was going prior to the discovery of DNA. That's how medicine was being driven forward. Back then, they didn't call it metabolics. They called it proteomics. So if you look up the research back then, it's proteomics, because what happens as glucose and proteins are built, what you have are byproducts of what's called proteostasis, if you're familiar with that term, the buildup of these proteins inside the cell, which create that extra junk that now help to cause senescence in cells and aging and all that fun stuff, and shrinking of telomeres. And that's a whole different discussion. But anyways, that's what Merrill was trained in. And then they come out with DNA and everything stops. And they say, guess what? We figure out DNA. And if we can solve that puzzle and figure out which gene to correct, then we'll never have disease again. Well, they were a little wrong, but it did bring us a lot farther. Now, what I love about where we're at now is now we're marrying both. Now we understand that your genes are your genes. And we've had, if you look at the twin studies, right? Identical genes, and yet how they evolve if they're in different lives, epigenetics, how the genes are affected, disease comes out totally differently. So guess what? Your genes are your genes, but they're not in stone. It's the expression of those genes, and those expressions are directly related to, as Ian mentioned, metabolics and mitochondria. And when we're younger, we generally have less issues. We heal faster. We recover better, generally speaking. As we age, that declines. And what's the declining factor? The main factor, other than the number of years on our driver's license, is the number of mitochondria that are operating and able to produce. If you can keep that energy level at a certain minimum, you stave off a lot of situations. So he knew all that. He rolled that together. That's why he looked for it, built on Otto Warburg's work, and he came up with lipoic acid mineral complex. There you go.
Wow. And this has remained largely hidden from the general public. Can you explain why that would be? Because this is such important work.
Well, he was, all things considered, he was probably 30 years ahead of his time. My dad was talking and preaching this in the 90s when he met Dr. Garnett. That's what Dr. Garnett was talking about. When I came on board, this is what Dr. Antonowicz, this was Dr. Forsyth, this is what all the doctors and researchers were talking about, but it fell on deaf ears to a certain degree because people didn't understand metabolism and mitochondria the way they do now. Now, especially after the pandemic fiasco, where now I think there's one good thing, only one. I think it raised everybody's level of awareness to the fact that there is no cure that fixes everything. And what made this person do so much better than this person? And I would argue to say that it was your mitochondria, and it's in the health of that mitochondria. Because where those protocols were initiated and applied, guess what? You had far better outcomes in those situations to the general populace. Now, but it's the same thing that we've been doing in whether it's the cardiovascular system, the neurological system, the immunological system, the oncology space. Fatigue is fatigue, and mitochondria are mitochondria. What's causing the damage? Okay, let's go address that too, but we have to focus on their health, or else we're just really swimming upstream.
So, it's interesting because you're so right. We need to focus on mitochondrial health, but if you listen to any person on TV who is presenting a diet or just talking about health in general, I don't think I've ever heard one of them. They speak about the food they're feeding and all that, but and I can speak of myself here. We don't speak about mitochondria. It's not a general. The only thing we sometimes hear, and as if it's something very rare, is about mitochondrial disease, which I know is pointing the way towards a lot of information, but they're regarded as something obscure in our bodies. I guess what I'm saying is somehow we need to get the information, that the importance of mitochondria out there, and it needs to be preached by those people who are preaching health.
I would agree, and I'm hoping that as they become more educated, understanding, sadly, most physicians, the last time they had mitochondrial discussion was probably their first, second year in college. After that, it went down. So I try and be a little more patient with them now as I like to discuss it, because they weren't trained that way. Now, the naturopaths, other doctors, now they're being exposed to it. And those that are getting it, in my opinion, they become the more successful practitioners, whether it's in the veterinary community, the human community, it doesn't matter, because they're using what I like to call as common sense medicine, right? Sure, use the best of all the tools you have. And if that's nutritional supplement because your body is composed of those ingredients, or whether it's this drug or whether it's Tylenol, that doesn't matter. That at least you understand, one, they can work together. Two, drugs usually deplete something. Some nutritional element of our body gets depleted. So at least replace it with something and then build it together and just look at your results. Don't believe me. Go look at how your patients are doing. And I think the writing's on the wall.
I think you've said something important there, Al. It's important to use the best of modern medicine and use the best of our understanding of metabolism combined together. That is a really powerful force. That's the best we have, surely.
It truly is. I mean, when I try and have discussions with someone that isn't necessarily biologically or chemically inclined to understand any of the mitochondrial discussion I might be having, I say, okay, well, hey, if you fall down and hurt your knee, you take some Tylenol because it'll make your knee feel better, right? Yeah, okay. I go, but does that Tylenol heal your knee? And the person will say, no, it doesn't. I said, okay, what heals your knee? Staying off it. icing it, heating it, massage, physical therapy, get it back to strength. I said, okay, so maybe the Tylenol helps you with discomfort, maybe helps you sleep at night. They go, yeah. I go, there you go. I go, you could be a cancer patient. Take the same approach to that. Don't think about it in any other different way, because that's the way our bodies work. I wish I didn't make it up. I was just explaining it the way that it is, right?
Wow.
So can you tell us a little bit more about how your product helps mitochondria?
First
Sure,
of all,
happy to.
Al, let me just interject real quick. I knew I would barely get to ask you any questions once Dr. Billinghurst.
Sorry, Rob.
No, I just knew he was going to be so on fire with this. He's going to probably take a week to research all this and do a deep dive, because like me, he's fascinated with cancer, because cancer is a failure in so many different processes, and how do we prevent that? And if you can prevent cancer, the opposite of that is you get longevity and health span. So
right.
If you work backwards from cancer, the thing I'm always fascinated, and I'll just say one more thing, the way I came to find you 20 years ago was from my doctor, who was one of the best doctors in the world, where people come from all over the world to deal with stage 4 cancers, and they need him to save their life quick. And he knew about Poly MVA and gave it to his patients. And I then brought it to my vet, who said, oh yeah, I know Poly MVA well. I use it for cancer patients. That was my experience. Now, I'm not saying, that's just what I heard and how I came to know you. I ended up actually giving it to my dogs for longevity and as a very potent bioavailable supplement. So that's just my quick background. So it feeds right into Dr. Billinghurst's question: what are the benefits of Poly MVA for pets?
Well, and before you answer, Al, just
go ahead.
Let me say, I have, as a veterinarian living in Australia, had never heard of it. Okay, so
okay.
I have been quite ignorant. I knew it more lately. I've known about lipoic acid because I was researching it for a particular problem, but a friend of mine. But anyway, please go ahead, because vets obviously have known about this for a long time, but not this vet. So please now go for it.
No problem. Thank you. So within that space, as you just mentioned, Rob, my father's passion was, and the change the course of his life was the death of my mother from cancer. So he was all about cancer and helping cancer patients, no matter what he did, even before Poly, and whether it was germanium and outside therapies that were being used all over the world. That's where his heart always was. So this is why I think it got so. This is where he would put it, of course, because that was his experience with it. For me, it was similar to that, but I immediately saw the differences that it was making across the board. Because even though by a definition, cancer being the disease that it is, and the difficulty in just what the problems it creates across any given situation, just by telling somebody they have cancer, you change their mind immediately, versus telling somebody, hey, you know what, you might have some heart disease going on here. Okay, they feel that they can there's better solutions for that. They honestly think of necessarily, versus cancer. What that puts into your mind is immediately this person that's gonna waste away, the chemo, the radiation, the disease. So psychologically, it's really a different animal from that perspective. But biologically, as Ian touched on, and you touched on with the mention of an anaerobic cell, it's actually quite simple, right? And what I mean by that is, think of bacteria and viruses and what they have to do to come into an animal, or us for that matter, change the situation before we come down with something. Whereas cancer is, by definition, our own cell that chose a different path. It's a path that is actually built into its wiring. So if we can change its environment, then could we change its outcome? So that is a much more, that's not treating the disease with a drug or something. No, that's going back to the biological fundamentals of understanding anaerobic versus aerobic respiration. And it makes it, because they're technically opposites of each other, we can now target these things metabolically, and it's why Dr. Garnett focused on this, and it's why, as you mentioned with your oncologist, well, they already knew about that, and in their world, they were using the best of both worlds, because chemo and radiation do kill cancer cells. Nobody's going to argue that. It damages other things as well, and in those cell damages, many times are mitochondrial or metabolic pathways. So why not do the best of both worlds? To me, it's as simple as breathing and common sense right now, but to the conventional physician, that is like you're whacked, you're off the planet. This is snake oil. There's nothing like that could ever help anybody. And you're like, really? Come on, man. In today's 21st century, you're actually going to make that statement. Some still do. So that's where I like to start with. And for me, it just impacted so many other things. I mean, so much so that, for example, I really didn't start being on poly every day till I was in my 30s. But guess what? My children have been on it since they've been in utero. I used it at first on my boxer when she was being treated for lymphoma. Okay, great. I just added to her. So now my dog gets it, guess what? Every day. Because I know the old adage that my grandma always told me that, an ounce of cure is worth a pound of, or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So again, that's common sense. And now that I understand and that we understand, I'm really surprised that more people understand that that's the key. And that's why utilizing this along with, of course, I don't care whether it's curcumin, it's resveratrol, vitamin D, quercetin, CoQ10. Let's go down the list of awesome supplements that do all kinds of other cool things too. Now you marry this together, right? On top of a great diet and good exercise and good sleep and good psychological and emotional health. Holy crap, are you kidding me? We'll win the Super Bowl every year. So that's kind of the overall kit and caboodle right there, if I could put it like that.
You touched on earlier, mentioned, I think it was lipoic acid. Was it thiamine? Those
yes.
two cofactors? Of course,
correct.
They're part of the Krebs cycle, operating way inside the mitochondria, and part of you might say kickstarting oxidative phosphorylation, which is the way in which a mitochondria uses oxygen to produce energy. So
it is.
It's very fundamental. Now, the problem is, and you also mentioned, of course, that the doctors say this is snake oil, and yet they actually learnt about this in the first or second year of their course. I did too, but I didn't have a clue what it all meant back then. Firstly, I didn't understand that it was in the mitochondria, the Krebs cycle. I guess I was too silly to even ask the question. And I had no idea of the fundamental importance of this. This was a year of biochemistry we just had to get through, which I learned by rote, never understanding a word of it, passed it, and then moved on. And I don't know how many other physicians put themselves in that same position. And maybe I was just stupid, but at that stage of my life, I had no understanding. And I must admit, when I have spoken to audiences about this, audiences of veterinarians, I often get very blank looks, and there's no questions asked. And when there's no questions asked, it usually means they haven't understood a word of what I said. But they know that it was important, and they recognise it from way back. So we do need better training of our physicians or our upcoming physicians in understanding the relationship between biochemistry and health. And I know that's a big training part of a naturopath, but it just doesn't seem to fit into the life of the average physician.
Yeah, it's in the past it was not even touched on at all. Fortunately, I've met a lot of newer, younger MDs and DOs where they're asking those questions. They're coming to the seminars. It's no longer the doctors that are generally, it used to be literally, I kid you not, there weren't any young doctors that ever came to these conferences and seminars that I do, or trainings that I go to, or that get put on and shared. It was always generally the older physicians, well into their 40s, had raised their families, or at least their kids were older, and now they had time to breathe and go and research these new things, because they realized that, 10, 15 years of practice, they looked at the outcome, and they know that they weren't really changing the health or the benefits of their patients. They were prescribing medications. Some people got better most of the time, but they weren't really doing what they signed up to do, primarily do no harm and, know your patients. That really dynamic has changed. So with that, that's why I do what I do, to educate them on that, because of something as unique as poly. Like you mentioned, it's not an accident. It's not, Dr. Garnett, to expand on the product, Ian, it's not just alpha lipoic acid, but it's alpha lipoic acid married to thiamine. This is what gives the complex, and why we call it lipoic acid mineral complex. They're bound together because those are two cofactors that are necessary for the conversion of pyruvate into acetyl-CoA. Dr. Garnett specifically bound them together so that no matter where one goes, its partner is always with it. They're great dance partners, as you mentioned, for so many other reasons. But if you marry them together, what can you do with that? It's like you and Rob, when you guys are together, and guess what? You guys two people can get so much more work done than just one individual by himself. It's not 2 times the amount. It becomes a factorial of the amount of energy. And that's what poly's doing, without, again, getting into the biochemical activity of the Krebs cycle and complex 1 to complex 2 and NADH to FADH and all that fun. But it's basic electrons exchange. And when you facilitate that, its upregulation is better energy levels of the cell. That cell knows what to do. If that cell's at 30%, it knows what to do with 30% energy. If that cell's at 50%, it knows what to do with 50%. If it has 100%, it knows what it can do at 100%. And at least that's a huge starting point. Now, having said that, I wish it was just that simple. But at least without that, as you mentioned, Ian, what's the difference between life? That's one of Dr. Garnett's actually famous lines to me that he had said to me a long time ago. What you said earlier. What's the difference between something that's alive and something that's dead? It is in its DNA. It's one has energy, one does not. That's powerful.
Indeed.
Well, let me ask you this: what are the benefits of Poly MVA? We should probably go just take a step back. Let's talk about that.
So what that does when you start at the central core of the cell's cycle, it can now upregulate itself. In other words, your liver is going to have enough energy to go do what the liver needs to do. Your pancreas, your cardiovascular system, your neurological system. And Rob, if you, depending on how deep dive you've dove into mitochondria, just look at the number of mitochondria per cell in different cells, and that'll tell you a lot. So, a heart cell, 5,000 to 8,000 mitochondria per cell. A nervous system cell, depending on the nerve cell, it's about 3,500 to 5,000. But when you look at a host, or what they call a ganglia of nervous system cells, you're talking, get ready, 100,000, 1 million mitochondria in this little minor network that has to facilitate what it does, whether that's for your heart or your spinal cord or your brain cell. So it's no wonder that 1/3 of the amount of oxygen we use, roughly, and 1/3 of the amount of food and glucose that we consume goes where? To our brain. The other part goes to our cardiovascular system. That means the rest of our body has only 1/3 of it to deal with. So why do ozone approaches work? Why do hyperbaric oxygen chambers work? Why do any type of oxygen support? Why do metabolic? It's like, come on, man. I wish I could take credit for this, Rob, but I can't. I mean, this is in the literature. Go read just do the math. I did the math and went, mitochondria are it. There we go.
Wow.
So the benefit from that becomes just phenomenal, because you can't, there's no way to do a metabolic protocol and say, you know what, just go take care of my heart cell and that's all. I don't need anything else looked at, but my heart needs mitochondrial support. It doesn't work that way. So this is why, not only it also speaks to why these protocols take a little bit of time to develop, because if you're already in deprivation, your mitochondria, right? If you're feeling okay, you're generally thinking you're healthy, you're 100%, you're fine. And you may not be. You might just be holding on. But we notice that when we get into our 40s, and people notice that when they get into their 50s, and all of a sudden they wake up one morning and life's different because the cells did as much as they could do. But if you keep that up there, look what happens. And look at the longevity. Look at the people now that are surviving and doing these very specific healthy diets, concentrated nutritionals. I mean, if you're familiar, look at Why is Tom Brady the guy he is playing quarterback? Why is the singer of Mick Jagger? Guess what? That guy does IVs twice a week. What does Tom Brady do? Come on. I mean, they're not flukes. They are just meticulous to their dietary standards, their nutritional level of what they do day in and day out. Yeah. Do they maybe, excrete, urinate out 50% of their nutrients? They do, but guess what? They're there. Or exactly, right? Yeah, who cares? Because if you ever run into that deprivation, as Ian was just talking about, so your cell goes to do something and its energy level here, it goes, gee, I can't do that. What do I do? It just doesn't do it. And after years, decades of not doing this function, the cell finally just gives up the ghost, and it can't do it past a point. You can't resuscitate some of these cells once they pass their life cycle. Everybody has a life cycle. That's just reality. So let's keep that life cycle going as best we can.
It's like it reminds me of like when you're thirsty, you're already too dehydrated.
There you go.
You don't know as you're on the road to dehydration that your body needs it until it's too late.
That's right.
And I always talk, you said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I always say stay out of the penalty box. You never want to be sick in the penalty box because it will take you a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of agony and a lot of grief to get out of it. It's much better to stay out of it. And those guys, by the way, they do a lot of hyperbaric. So Tom and Mick Jagger, just to name a few, I happen to know what some of the things they do, but you're right. IVs and those are going right in the blood, right to the brain, blood-brain barrier. So does Poly MVA cross the blood-brain barrier?
Yes, sir. It does. Both water and fat soluble, crosses the blood-brain barrier. So again, do the math. The support from that perspective. And that's what you asked earlier, the question, again, well, my dad was always focusing in the oncology space because he wanted to help those people were just close to his heart, and they were to mine as well. But I was just looking at going, wow, look at their blood work. Wow, look at kidney function. Look at liver enzymes. Wow, look at bilirubin. Look at A1C. Look at LP(a). Those are the things, at least me, that like I love that stuff because those are true. Think of all the needles on the dash of your car, right? You always want to see them in the right place, but when one kind of goes out that way, you don't notice it. But if all of them are going this way, pointing that way, especially the inflammatory factors, that's one red flag, two red flags, three red flags. No, you need to keep those needles in their normal range as much and as often as possible. But again, we don't know necessarily when those are breaking down, right? I mean, it's great. The new cars of today, they'll tell you, right, you got 10% oil life left. Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know that. And now you know to go get an oil change. But before that, you'd be like, well, the sticker fell off the windshield. Was it 2,000 miles ago? Was it 10,000 miles ago? The better we can maintain our cars, let alone the better we can maintain our own health, the longer we're going to last. That's just life 101. And mitochondria, the heart of it, and I like to use that car analogy because I'm a car guy. You keep your engine running, guess what? But you still got to keep up with your brakes and your tires and your rotations and wash your car and paint it, keep it in the garage. It'll last a long time. It really will. If you abuse it, leave it outside and don't take care of it, you're gonna have troubles down the road.
100%.
So.
Yeah, I use that car analogy all the time, Al. So you've just expanded on it. It's most important, and it's so obvious, isn't it? That and people, I think, relate to that when they understand. Yes, if you use the wrong fuel, the wrong spare parts, and you don't look after the car, it's not going to last you. And it's the same with our bodies and our pets' bodies. And it's just a matter of understanding what our DNA is actually demanding, and it's demanding the right nutrients in the right form. So it's not even a matter of, in many ways, you have to present them in a form that the body can use. And what I'm hearing is that this unique product that has been developed, your father, he didn't develop it, but he took it over from the originator. This is a product which is in a form, the marriage of two, lipoic acid and thiamine, which actually helps kickstart this energy production within the mitochondria, within the cells. So absolutely brilliant. Wow. I'm blown away, having learned more about this product, even as we've spoken today. So thank you.
Well,
On my
you're more than welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
I'm sitting here aging before your very eyes.
Aren't we all? We all are. That's, it becomes more pressing, and it becomes more valuable the older we get, right?
Indeed.
And so we realize it, and I get that. And that's why, like I said, I'm excited because my three sons are now, I mean, they do what I call the complete approach. They do their vitamin D, they do their CoQ10, they do their poly, they do their liver support, they do their vitamin C, they do their just their basic multi. And I can honestly tell you, when I look at my own peer group for myself, when I looked at my dad's peer group, because he had stayed on poly from his 60s until he passed away at 87. I remember his nephrologist, because my father was a diabetic, by the way. Let's put it this way: my father was a diabetic who thought 280 in his blood sugar was normal. And his nephrologist would scratch his head. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, I want to eat what I want to eat, so I just take more poly." So you do what?
Wow.
So it gives you an example, and it kind of goes to that question, Rob, that, hey, nobody's perfect. I've plenty of times where I've eaten something I shouldn't have eaten, or I've drank too much that I shouldn't have drank, whatever. And I abuse myself. But you know what I do the next day? That's right. I don't take 1 teaspoon of poly. I take 2. Right? I got COVID. I did. Okay. What did I do? I went from 1 teaspoon of poly to 8. I went from 100 milligrams of CoQ10 to 6. I went from 1,000 milligrams a day or 2,000 milligrams a day of vitamin C to 10. I went from 10,000 IU of vitamin D to 50. Okay. And I was down and out for like 3.5 days. And guess what? I was right as rain after that, and I was fine. So that's what I speak to when I talk about this. Isn't miracle science. This isn't, MLM going to sell you some new, rose bush that they found in the Amazon jungle that suppose the Indians have been eating for whatever. That may be good and well for them, totally. But that type of marketing, as I'm sure both of you have been around long enough to know, it's just marketing. It's not true, genuine science of why it's built on, what Dr. Arnett did here, why poly is what poly is very specific to mitochondrial health. Those ingredients are there not haphazardly. They were chosen because of the science, and that's why poly does what poly does.
So you touched upon it. So let's just address this right now. Is it safe to take alpha lipoic acid daily?
Yeah, ALA by itself is good. Nothing wrong with good old ALA. Poly, the poly form of ALA, that's right. The doctors like to call it alpha lipoic acid on steroids, because if you give alpha lipoic acid, which is wonderful to give, if you're not giving thiamine with it, then you're not giving it its dance partner. So even if you took some alpha lipoic acid and then you take some thiamine, there's no guarantee they're going to be over here where you need them to be in that mitochondria. What poly says is that, guess what? You can't do it any other way, because it is bound together. So that's why the protocols, as you may remember them, are just similar to ALA. You have to saturate them. You have to there's a loading dose, as they call it, because something that's water and fat soluble, it just doesn't. You don't just. It's like watering a dried plant. You don't water it with 10 gallons immediately. You take 1 gallon every hour and put it on there, and it's absorbability. You saturate it. That analogy you made about dehydration. Yeah, somebody who's dehydrated, you don't just dump water on them. You have to give it to them in drops and very slowly to rehydrate them very slowly, because you can make them sick. Well, guess what? Our cells do the same thing, metabolically speaking. And then what happens, a little known factoid that you probably both are aware of, is that when you kickstart mitochondria, the first thing they do is they take everything intracellularly and say, hey, we're being activated. What do we got to do? Let's make some space. Let's clear out all this junk, because we've got all this junk that's been building up, all these quote-unquote toxins, sometimes they're referred to. Those have to get kicked out. Okay, that's great. Where do they have to go? They got to then go to the kidneys and liver and go through the lymphatic system and all that. So this is not just a one and done. This is a process of that rehydration, that returning on the mitochondria, and then kickstarting the liver, getting the kidneys back on board. Let's get that blood flow. Let's get that oxygenation. Let's use a hyperbaric now. Let's slowly bring up this volume and this energy level. You don't just turn the lights on and kick your grandparents out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Well, it's funny you queued me up, because my next thing I was going to bring up to you is one of the things that this is 2004, about 2006 maybe, is when I discovered this. When I heard that you had to give a liver tonic support with it, I said, "Oh man, I'm in. This thing is good. If you got to support the liver to do its job, some serious detoxing is going on."
That's right.
And so we did it. We followed your protocol. You guys had some liver support. I gave my dog, and then just nutraceuticals, and then we did rectal ozone to my dogs too. And then of course I did a lot of hydration, and they were already feeding raw, thanks to the gentleman below me. And so that was my exposure to this. Was like, oh man, this stuff has got to be, it's a much more direct in the cell than your average alpha lipoic acid pill would be, that you certainly could supplement your dog's diet with. And it's really important, I think. I'm going to say this as honestly a selling point. Your stuff's expensive. This is not like go to the store and just pick up a bottle of a nutraceutical, but it's expensive for a reason. The stuff is doing some serious work. And I mean, the combating of the environment and glyphosate and all the crazy stuff in our world, you need everything, every heavy hitter you can to combat against it. So anyway, I just want to say that. And it's not out of reach, but it is expensive because of the quality.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I call it relative now. If anything, here's the wonderful, not the wonderful thing. Here's the interesting thing. At least now in 2024, have you seen the prices of anything anymore?
Yeah.
And I think the professional community that understands this, they don't ask the question as to why it's as expensive as it is, relatively speaking. They ask, why are the other things so cheap?
Yeah.
That's the reason. Why is Taco Bell so cheap? It isn't because it's high quality food. I'll tell you that. Now, having said that, in a pinch, does it work? Of course it does. But you sustain on it? No, you can't do that. So when you're using nutritional supplements, you have to ask that question. Sadly, you don't know many times. Do you buy something at Costco, or do you buy it at GNC? Do you get it from Dr. So-and-so? And those are tough because unless you get the C of A's, the origination of where they're getting it, how it's manufactured, are there excipients, yada, yada, yada. If you don't know this lingo, you don't know, right? Hey, should I get Pennzoil or should I just get Walmart oil? Is it really any different, or are they just bagging up the same stuff and putting a different label on it? And unless you're in the professional realm, you don't know. Whereas Poly, guess what? Not exist anywhere else on the face of the planet except in the bottle that you see there. And whether you want to make one drop of it or you want to make 100 gallons of it, it's a 2-week process. For those of us, or those of you that have ever made a super complex recipe in your kitchen, guess what? Think of something you pulled out of the oven, a nice complex casserole of something. Now, does it have butter and maybe some sour cream and cheese and chicken and whatever? Okay, it did. And you could have had those things individually, but you took them and you mixed them. You simmered the cream and the cheese all together so you can make your sauce. You cooked your chicken a certain way to a certain area. You layered it like this. You let it sit. You stuck it in the oven, and then when you pull it out, does it taste like? It's not. It has made new bonds. It has complexed together in a completely new way that doesn't exist anywhere except in Grandma's famous chicken casserole, let's call it. That's Poly in a nutshell. That's why Poly is not all these ingredients shaken in a bottle and handed to you. No, 2 weeks to make it, 5 different cofactors to put this together, to put that together, to combine those, to literally cook it in an oven, and then it comes out as what we call Poly MVA. That's why it's different. So relative, but boy, some of those supplements now, when you look at them, guess what? They're $150 for a month's supply, and then they want you to take more sometimes for therapeutic levels or reasons, what have you. It all of a sudden I look at it, I go, look at that. It's the Poly, I think, retails at $120 for a 4 ounce, and you're like, okay, well, that's $120. That's $90 for this curcumin. Okay, so anyways,
yeah, don't compare it. Do not compare price for unsimilar things, apples to oranges, because
That's right.
This is not a regular, although it is in the supplement category legally, it is not a supplement that you get on a shelf. And I just want to say one other thing, because I know Dr. B's, ready to jump out of the gate from all the stuff that he just heard.
Okay.
I just want to say this, and I think he'll appreciate this, is that our product also takes 2 weeks to make. And you mentioned pyruvate, and pyruvate's also a byproduct of fermentation. So it's very interesting. A lot of this stuff, I hear a lot of, there's overlap in some of the things I'm hearing, which is so super interesting how these, and fermentation is nothing new either, and it's just, so anyway, Dr. B.
Yeah, just on that last point, fermentation is the original form of energy production, actually, we think. But anyway, that's also in dispute too, because we can't go back 4 billion years to really figure that out. But I'll have one very simple and a fairly fundamental question. If you're giving Poly MVA, do you have to also supplement with a B complex?
So the complete B selection in poly is, so you got your alpha lipoic acid, you have your thymine. And that's why we call it technically really Poly MVA. Poly, which means multiple. So that's the lipoic acid mineral complex. And then it also has additional M minerals, V vitamins, A amino acids. So it has B2 and B12. It has molybdenum. It has formylmethionine. And if I could put up a picture of normal metabolic pathways, I could easily point to you as to why these are what we call cofactors. The cofactors to attenuate what has to happen down that electron transport chain of the mitochondria. So how our cells make energy is a very specific process, as you mentioned. Krebs cycle activation, OX sometimes referred to, sometimes citric acid cycle. Either way, it starts at complex. It's a step. It goes through complex 1, complex 2, complex 3, and complex 4. And in that, these cofactors all come together to attenuate and make the enzymes for 38 units of ATP. So it's pretty fascinating from that perspective, but that's why those are in there. So, but to answer your question, you can definitely marry this with, let's say, B5, B6, B17, definitely, because the family of B vitamins also play very key roles in other aspects of metabolic activity. So, And with that, guess what? So does vitamin C, so does CoQ10, so does glutathione, so does vitamin A, so does vitamin D, so does asparate, the long chain, short chain fat. So for those of us that love that kind of stuff, this is where we now realize this is why a nutritional overall protocol is needed. I think of it like it's a team, right? It's 11 guys on the field, or it's a symphony in the orchestra. Could you have one person playing the clarinet and do a beautiful job, and one person play the piano and do a beautiful job, and every other instrument out there? Of course you could. But you take all those instruments and you put them together in with one conductor. One of my doctors calls Poly MVA as conductor. It says, all right, guys, vitamin C, glutathione, NAD, you guys all ready? Let's get it on. Here we go. I'm gonna give you the boost.
That's fabulous what you've just said, Al, because if we go to something like AVCO or FEDIAF or NRC, a lot of the things you've mentioned are not part of their protocol. And so this is a point that I've been making for a long time, that if you are feeding real food, you're feeding those things that we know about, the ones we don't know about, and the ones we don't yet recognize as important. And that's been the thrust of me saying to people for a long time, feed food, not this artificial synthetic product, which is made from a very limited number of so-called essential nutrients. And what you're saying is, of course, that in fact, if you're feeding real food, which is what an animal's eaten for millions of years, all of those things are actually there. All right. Thank you for that. That was a wonderful piece of information that you've just given to our audience. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity and again, I can't take credit for it. I've just been able to synthesize this from the Dr. Forsyths and the Dr. Andersons and Dr. Garnett's and Antonowicz and everybody else that taught me. And I've just taken a piece of it and I went, and I get to go see it either work or not work. I love something in theory. Theories are great. I can talk about the theory of this and the theory of that, but let's go let the rubber hit the road and see where it lands. Okay, let's do it again. And if we got something there, then we got something there. That's just that's good, solid, groundbreaking research from that perspective. Stay out of the hypothetical world. Well, it should do this. Well, a lot of things should happen. But I don't know how long you've been around, but a lot of should in my life that shouldn't have happened either.
That's great. Does it actually work in practice? That's the big thing.
Ian, how many? This is an honest question. How many studies have you seen from when they started some exciting news about something? They went to phase 1. They even went to phase 2. And do you ever see it get out of phase 3?
No,
but yet year after year.
You hear constantly the latest breakthrough. It's going to fix it. And of course, you never hear any more.
Right. And so with that, you're just so that has taught me a lot. When I used to get excited about it, I genuinely was, wow, they're going to have a cure. They're going to do this. They found that. And then you start delving into what they were doing and you go, huh. So it taught me a lot about, and that's why I went back and did all my research, because my background is actually in engineering, but I brought that engineering background to biological mechanisms and research and said, what's really working or not? That's how I want to judge what something is, not whether or not it's just because you say it is. I get it. It sounds great in theory, but let's put it to the test and actually follow through with its mechanism. And I think the reason why nutritionals are actually more powerful is what you just said. When you put animal or even ourselves on a very natural, holistic, complete diet, nature worked on that for billions, millions of years, whatever it was, to synthesize already what was existing to do what it needed to do. If we augment that and take advantage of that, that's just common sense to a certain degree. This isn't like rocket science. Now, let's put a little bit of rocket science with it. Let's use ozone. Let's use hyperbarics, where now we can use our technology to really concentrate. Hey, let's do high dose vitamin C. Hey, let's do these IV nutritionals that can concentrate things and really turn the needle on something that we need to. Okay, great, wonderful. But at the end of the day, we're just building on the basic mechanism of human, mammalian, and this Earth's physiology. That's it.
Yeah,
that's what we need to do. That's where rather than this combative approach where we try to take out the cancer and take out the patient along with it, we actually need to support the patient properly. And it's such a different approach, and it's such a caring approach. It's also very logical and common sense. But hey, common sense ain't all that common.
I was thinking that as you were saying that.
Cancer is a knock at the door, and it's your opportunity to answer the call if you have enough notice and time to deal with it. Let me ask you this: with the world covered in glyphosate, this chemical, and glyphosate we now know turns off the shikimate pathway. Can this help keep that turned on or help with that in any way?
I don't know. It's something that I'm definitely looking into and trying to determine how we could really do that. I mean, I love studies for their basics of say, hey, does it knock on this door or not knock on the door? Just because it knocks on the door doesn't necessarily mean it's going to answer. But at least by knocking on the door, it's like, okay, we know it swims in that water, so that at least it could be an option that then researchers and physicians might be able to use X, Y, or Z in any situation. Metabolics, we're just scratching the surface. I hope to God I didn't make it sound like it's easy, because let's continue that mathematical example of the number of mitochondria in a cell, and then let's say I think the number roughly is the average has 2,000 mitochondria in the cell, and you times that times 30 trillion cells in the human body, so you're at 64 quadrillion mitochondria. Wow. Yeah, I checked out on that one. So we're just scratching the surface of this, and it's already making a huge impact. Look what changing the world in diet has done. Look what things like poly and CoQ and glutathione and NAD do. Wonderful. Okay, now let's find these the next generation that's going to take what you've learned, what I've learned, and now coming out right now, and then applying it. That's what I'm getting really excited for. I've kind of acquiesced to it that I think we've made a dent. It's changed. I think, Rob, I think you'd agree. I think it's better than it was. It's out there in a way that's 20 years ago when, they were throwing people in jail to a certain degree, versus now they're kind of like, just, you know what? How do you say this to? Because you now have patients and people that are sharing. So not all those people on the internet can be lying. Maybe they're exaggerating. Maybe they don't quite understand what they did and they're tagging it, but yes, they did something about it. That's the message I keep seeing. And great, let's keep that evolving. And as Ian had mentioned, the powers that be don't like that. The old powers, that's not their way of, they're losing control. And when they lose control, they start changing the narrative. I get that. That's what the system
maintaining power is what they do.
Yeah, correct. The system.
Position. Yeah.
That's right. Whether it's the military industrial complex of the world, whether it's the pharmaceutical industrial complex of the world, whether it's the food manufacturing industrial complex of the world, the farmers, the cow, they all have agendas of their own. And I'm not going to knock them for that. However, what I'm going to knock you for is saying that you think you have the only one way and it's the true and the right way. And I'm going to say, no, it's not. And if you're not going to be willing to listen to others, that this human being is just as valuable as this other human being, then clearly you're not the person I'm going to be having a conversation with any longer. Have a nice day.
You said something a little earlier that we've just scratched the surface of metabolism. And when you think about it, metabolism has been in production at the beginning of it was probably close to 4 billion years ago, and it's been honed by trial and error ever since. Yeah. So to understand those cybernetic connections, which are complex beyond belief, it's our understanding is going to. We will never. We certainly won't in my lifetime, and probably in my grandchildren's lifetime, ever get to fully understand it. But the more we can understand, the more we can utilize it, as this Poly MVA is doing, because it's understanding step, which is a vital step in metabolism and energy production. So more power to this product, and well done for you. I'm listening to you, and your knowledge is incredible in the biochemical space, in that whole space. It's just brilliant. So keep pushing and keep teaching our doctors and vets if you get that chance. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you. I'm honored that I just think it's pretty simplistic. I'm just a guy. That's all I am. It's exciting though. My 22-year-old son is in looking to do something in the healing and medical field. So he's actually going through all his mitochondrial classes like right now in college. So he and I have these great discussions, and so they are teaching him there. So, and I'm telling him like going, wow, man, if I'd have had that in college, knowing what I know now, and he's actually getting excited. He's like, so Dad, you think I could? I'm like, oh yes, you can. You tell you what, you push this from whether it's in sports medicine or some other field that you want to go into. Yeah, you are an exciting place to be, because he already does all those therapies for myself at home. I play with Ozone with him. We play with Poly and all the different aspects you can play with Poly. And so he's already exposed it. My kids have seen it. So they're already exposed. The cat's out of the bag for them. And hopefully no one will be able to twist their mind another way out of that. So, but we'll see.
You can look forward to your grandson going even further.
Exactly.
Or your grandchildren.
So this has been eye-opening for me, and I know for Dr. B. So we know you have 2 websites. And so I want to just ask you about, let's start with the first one. It's polymva.com. What is that website?
So that's the original that we've had since back in 20-something plus years ago. So it's the basic information that establishes who Poly is, who I am, what we do, what we've been doing, sets the tone for that. What my space of what I like to do is then I don't like being tied into the sales of aspects of things. I like to go to the physicians and the doctors and do this learning, so that when I can come to you, it's like, buy a bottle of Poly, don't buy a bottle of Poly. That's not my concern. It's how did you use Poly, and if you did get a positive response, tell me about it. If you also got a negative response, tell me about it. If you didn't get any response, tell me about it, because that makes me want to go looking. That's what I want to know, because I've seen great responses, and I've seen them all. And my question is, I wonder why. That doesn't make any sense. These two are almost identical cases, and it didn't work like it should have. Okay, let's go explore. And that takes time, that takes research, and that's what I love to do, to just so I can have these conversations. Because, again, what Ian mentioned were some things that I hadn't heard, so I file that away. And then, Rob, you shared some things as well, so I'm going to file that away. So, hey, you have anybody out there that wants to do some little pilot animal human applications in X, Y, or Z? I'm all ears.
Yeah. And it's at Poly MVA, where if you're anywhere in the world that they distribute, you can go to the bottom and click distributors. There's a link about distributors. Find out where they sell. They sell it in Australia. They sell it a lot of other places. I also see that you have a link for the people who are like your directory of medical experts, doctors, etc. I don't remember the name of that link, but do you have vets there as well under that?
I believe we do. If not, I know they're going to reset up the Poly for Pet site separate, so that way it has all its information for just the pet parents, and allows them to just focus in on that. For a long time, as you well know, in the animal community, they're used to spending some amount of something to go visit, to purchase this, that, the other. So for the pets, it's usually been a no-brainer. And with animals, if there's one thing we learned in the animal studies, is there's no placebo effect. Either their behavior, their nesting, their eating, their activity levels change, or it doesn't. And that was true in the studies that we did with Dr. Ogilvy. They knew within 2 weeks, which animals were getting poly and which ones were not. Why? Because those parameters all improved. And the researchers said, yep, they knew exactly which ones. So, the animals are easy. They're easy to tell. The humans, they got that, 20 to 30% placebo effect. And are they compliant? Did they take it like they were supposed to? You got all the other issues that go with humans.
Yeah. But I have a pro tip for people that are, and I've done this my whole life with both my medicine and care and my vets, is I look at really, really, really amazing products and what vets are behind it, or doctors. And I work backwards. I go and I call those and I start researching doctors that way and vets, because these are the people who get it. They're already using innovative therapies, whether that be Poly MVA or Ozone or anything. I go right at a product and I'll go backwards. So folks, if you're looking for a really great vet, I'm not saying every vet that uses Poly MVA is great, but they have an awareness and they have an understanding of what this does, and they want to be part of it. So I think that's really valuable. Don't you think, Dr. B?
Well, absolutely. It's a great starting point, and then again, you have to figure it out for yourself whether they truly are the vet you want. But that's a very individual thing, and it's very individual for your dog and your dog's or cat's condition. But yes, you will be speaking to a vet with an awareness of the fact that its medicine goes way beyond what we were taught at vet school or med school.
Yeah,
definitely. Yep.
You weed out all the people who, all the vets who have no idea, and they say, metabolic what? And mitochondrial health what? And then you have the second website, Al, and that's Poly MVA Store. So what's that?
So that's one of the distributors that supplies all the various products. So whether it's you want Poly MVA, you want Poly MVA for pets, or you want the Poly Plus that we have that's for doctors and for veterinarians, they have access to all those products, whereas some of the other distributors only do one or two of the products. So if you want the complete information.
Poly Plus. Ooh.
Yep. There you go.
I like that. That's what you need, Ian. You need to get some Poly Plus.
Tell me about it.
Get that plus, that vitamin A. Yeah, we didn't touch on that, but it's exciting to again be a part of it from that perspective, so that it provides for the community the tools. From the physician's perspective, that's what we're giving them tools in their toolbox. Sticking with that car analogy, and you don't use all your tools in your toolbox all the time, but when you have that one specialty tool that you kind of have the one that's always involved, no matter what, right? You're going to need this tool as a basic to get into the system that you're going to be fixing. And when you use those consistently, you're more successful. And if you don't have that tool, how can you be as successful? So that's what we really try and focus on with the physicians and the professionals. And then with the end users, they always have access to it because you have those out there that just want that support. Like Rob was mentioning, you can give it to yourself daily and give it to your pets daily. So there you go.
There's the central message for your advertising, Al. That one tool.
There you go, 1-2 combination. So, but it's exciting, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So.
Absolutely, well done.
Final words, Dr. B.
Final words. Anybody out there listening, you have to understand your metabolism. It's vital to your health, to your. And I always include humans and pets in the same breath because we are just animals on this planet, and basically we're pretty much the same. Just little blips in the evolutionary path that pushed us in a particular direction, but we all come from the same space, the same basic eukaryotic cells, and our metabolism basically is the same, and our mitochondrial function is the same. So if everybody out there can now start thinking in terms of their health is so not only closely related, but is their mitochondrial function, then they then start to think about how they can enhance it. And a lot of what we've talked about today is pushing in that direction. Basically diet, and then Al has produced a very specific tool, which is absolutely brilliant, and I've got to go and get my share of that tool, I think. But metabolism, the key to our health.
He's going to start hitting the sauce, the Poly MVA.
There you go.
Sauce.
All right, I look forward to you. I always get excited about it. So please let me know when you do, and yeah, use yourself as a guinea pig. So
absolutely.
And I don't know whether you got family members. Trust me, I used to sneak it around to people just to try and do different things with them. So have some fun with it.
And Al,
I'll let you know.
Who was the original doctor, the name? Could you say it slowly that your father discovered?
Dr. Merrill Garnett.
Okay.
Yep. He's still there in Long Island, New York. He's 94.
Oh, I know our next podcast guest.
Well, we could try. Definitely, we could try.
That's right. Well, and then your mom's name?
My mom's name was Julia. Julia Sanchez.
All right. Well, thanks to Meryl, and thanks to Julia, and not very many people can say their mother passed away and did so much good for the world. I mean, it inspired your dad to do a ton of work. So, thanks to Julia.
Thank you.
And thanks to Meryl. On that note, thank you all for being with us and inspiring us on the metabolism. And guys, look into it for your pets. It's a very unique supplement. I highly recommend. And have a great day, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. Good luck. God bless. Be well. Bye-bye.